from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Hello, this is Reverend Charles Harrison with Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And today I have two very special guests with me. Both have been friends a long time. One is the former deputy mayor under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith, John Hall, who is also a faithful member of Barnes United Methodist Church. And then my other longtime friend is Olgen Williams, former deputy mayor under Mayor Ballard, and also a community activist who's been involved in working with reducing violence in the city of Indianapolis for a lot of years. We will be right back. Welcome back to our conversation today about the whole issue of addressing the issue of urban violence. And the real question is that you hear all the time, can urban violence be reduced? And right now, across the country, we have seen 2 years of record-breaking violence in cities all across America, and particularly locally in Indianapolis, we have had 7 years of record-breaking violence in the city, when the city's coming off of probably 12 years where Indianapolis was probably one of the leading large cities in America when it came to innovative ways of addressing this issue of violence. Particularly, we are well known for our work in Weed and Seed, the community, city law enforcement partnerships that help produce probably 12 years of an average of about 96 murders in the city. So let's get into the conversation today and with my two guests and two good friends. John, back in the Goldsmith days, really when I first got involved with 10 Point, can you kind of talk about the issues of violence under Mayor Goldsmith, and what was his approach in trying to address that issue?
That's a very good question. Goldsmith initiated what he called the Neighborhood Empowerment Initiative, which he felt that neighborhoods should be invested with skills and training so that they could then determine what kind of approach they needed from the city. The Lilly Foundation Lilly Endowment spent about $5 million during the first years of his administration. I'm not sure if Mayor Olgen was getting any money from Lilly's when you came in, but we got that money, and it was to train those skilled leaders in neighborhoods to then design strategies from the neighborhood at the bottom to come up and then approach the city and say, we figured it out, here's what we want to do. That was his piece. He wanted to empower neighborhood leaders to do that. During my period of time, crack cocaine hit this city pretty tough. 98, right in there, 97, 98, coming from the West Coast, moving in. And I think I was around during the highest number of homicides at that point. I think it was 143, topped the numbers of homicides that we've ever had here in the city. So Steve Goldsmith had seen that in Boston there was this model of faith-based leaders who were on the ground and who had began to show some good numbers about how they could reduce violence. And he invited them here to give a demonstration to ministers and to other faith-based organizations and neighborhood groups to show how it was being done there and whether or not we could implement something like that here in Indianapolis.
Olgen, you have been a part of this, and when you work with the Christa Moore House and the work you have done in Hallville, can you kind of talk about that whole weed and seed model during that time, during Mayor Goldsmith's time here in Indianapolis as we tried to address the record-breaking violence that we've seen in 1998 and our approach to trying to address it citywide.
Sure, Pastor. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you and my good friend John Hall. I was thinking about John this morning. I said, man, John, we got so much connectivity that people don't realize how connected we are. I go down the list, but even both of us being deputy mayor and of course Shortridge graduates.
Yes.
Yes. But I got involved around the time. I got involved under Mayor Goldsmith initiative. In 1993, I remember going down to the Walker. He had a neighborhood conference, big conference forum, and that's where I first went to my formal neighborhood training. Coming off the streets, coming out of the barbershop, got invited to get involved in the neighborhood. And I met Robert Woodson, one of the people he brought in with some of the money they got from Lily's. And Mayor Goldsmith was big on trying to train neighborhood leaders to control their own destiny. And he had neighborhood administrators out there. And I got hooked. I'm a product of Power to the People. I was in the, I guess I was in the revolution movement. It never was televised, but I thought it was going to be. But I got trained, became a Christian, and just changed my lifestyle. But when Mayor Goldsmith brought in Eugene Rivers from Boston, as John was alluding to, I never heard of 10-Point Coalition. But at the same time, Mayor Goldsmith also brought in a program to the west side, Hallville, called Weed and Seed, a new program out of the first George Bush. It was trying to figure out how to deal with the crime in urban communities. And we were blessed to be able to pick it up after another neighborhood rejected it because it came from a Republican. But we embraced it. And so we were with the training that they did with Mayor Goldsmith and what Weed and Seed brought to the neighborhood, we were able to make some difference. And one of the reasons why they bought it, we had two arson detectives shot while they were doing a stakeout in the public housing community, and that frightened the city. Thought things was really going crazy. And so we were at the first meeting with you all. Reverend Eugene Rivers came in, but we were fortunate enough to start the Westside Community Ministries under Reverend Mel Jackson at the same time. Right. And we basically, let me use the word in a positive sense, we stole ideas from the east side and from the 10-Point model to implement programs on the west side. So we really was trying to do the same thing that Mayor Goldsmith thought that would work. And of course, you all in the Umwa area and the area on the west side where I was raised up in thought it was a good idea. Because they always said preachers not doing nothing, and you all as ministers stepped up and said, we're going to do something. That's it. And this is a good model.
In hearing both of you talk about it, it felt like in the Mayor Goldsmith days, and then it followed up certainly under Mayor Peterson too, it was more of a bottom-up approach to addressing the issue of violence. And we had a lot of success even after 1998 in bringing down the level of violence. But what seemed to be unique during those days, that it was neighborhood-driven. So neighborhoods was kind of driving the violence reduction strategy in their neighborhood. So it didn't look the same in every neighborhood since it was neighborhood-driven. Have we gotten away from that kind of model, and would it work today? Would what we did in the late 90s, early 2000s, in the midst of what we're seeing now, homicide numbers last year in 2021 reached 271. Would that kind of model still work today in this city if it was more neighborhood-driven, bottom-up approach?
Well, of course, I'm a neighborhood guy. I was trained that way when I first got involved in neighborhood work. I believe in neighborhood empowerment. I believe that under Mayor Goldsmith, he had seven targeted neighborhoods. Yes. All in the urban core where the majority, not all the crime, but the majority of the crime was happening. And it was easy to see that. It was for every reason. So he targeted those 7 neighborhoods. You can't fix neighborhoods, people. You can't parachute things in. It has to come. I never seen corn grow just in the air. You got to be planted, it got to come up to produce fruit. But the same thing with neighborhood change. The people said these problems start with the families. Maybe, we can't go into families, but where do families live? They live in neighborhoods. Who have access to them? Neighborhood groups have access to them in churches, and neighborhood groups and other neighborhood-based have more access to them. Therefore, you give them the resources to communicate, to bring in positive initiatives. It makes a difference. When people feel good about controlling their own destiny, if African Americans has been told what to do in America for over 400 years. So when you empower black communities and community of poverty to control their destiny, they feel good, and that makes them feel like somebody really realized they have some value, and they give them dignity, and they really roll their sleeves up and begin to do something, because no one is now trying to fix them or parachute solution in. So it always will work. It'll work to this day if we would push that initiative.
John, what do you think about that approach, that more of a bottom-up approach? Will it still work today when we're looking at, these record-breaking numbers of really shootings, stabbings, and homicides, here in the city of Indianapolis?
I think that we're right on target. The piece here is, Goldsmith's whole piece, as Olgen pointed out, we had 7 targeted neighborhoods, and I think 8 came in, during my period, that we were concentrating the total number of resources we had available to these 7-8 targeted neighborhoods. Now, when I came along, there began to be rumbling about these resources ought to be spread out to more of the suburb, maybe I don't want to say suburban, but the outer rings of the core city, in order to be fair. Because, the argument was, well, if you're just going to concentrate on those 7, then the outer rings over a period of time with lack of resources are going to become just like the core city. There's no question that the neighborhood leadership and the neighborhood involvement can solve issues. Will it take it to zero? Of course not. But the question is, what sort of strategy can you develop that's coming up from that neighborhood that they buy into, that they are willing to sacrifice and work to? What kind of strategy can be developed that balances the utilization of our police force? I know Chief Zunt was around when I was working with Steve Goldsmith, and he was very open to working with neighborhoods and making sure that we balanced force with the carrot of inducing those resources into the neighborhood to change that neighborhood. But yes, can those numbers be dropped from the high numbers that they are now? I believe so. And I believe that that it's going to take working both from that bottom-up approach. There's got to be a parental piece in here, maybe long-term, but unless you focus on that disintegrated family structure that is putting young people out here in the streets with the only choice for them is to look at that criminal element. I think you've got to address that, but you've also got to address other pieces of that puzzle, which are, how does the little junior get skilled in his school so that he can be eligible for a decent paying job that he can live. And, today we are still looking at schools that are struggling. We're looking at families that are not able to direct their children toward a pathway out, and then we're looking at a court system that even if I am bad, I may be back out in a day or two. Those are combustible in the neighborhoods, but it's going to take that bottom approach of letting neighbors develop strategies on their own.
Well, this has been a real good conversation as we have talked a little bit about the history of Indianapolis under 7 mayors, really going back to the 90s as to how they really, approached this whole issue of violence as we saw the crack epidemic hit Indianapolis, and we started seeing the development of gangs and cliques in the neighborhood that was driving certainly the violence in the city. We want to end this podcast with that subject, but then we want to do next week part 2 of the broadcast in dealing with really the root causes of the violence, which we touched on a little bit, and what was really some successful strategies that helped to bring it down. This is Reverend Harrison, and so thank you so much for joining me today on Real Talk.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.